I've been invisible so long, I forgot what it felt like to be seen. The words tore out of Nora Sinclair before she could stop them. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and overheated air, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like trapped insects. 72 hours. That's how long she had been here, in this bed with the threading into her left arm, her daughter Emma sleeping in a chair beside her that didn't recline, the social worker sitting across from her with pen hovering over clipboard, waiting for an answer to a question that seemed impossible to explain. How did you end up at Luca Calabrese's mansion? The social worker asked. Her name tag read Patricia. She had kind eyes, but they were confused eyes. Everyone's eyes had been confused for 3 days now. Nora's hands trembled against the thin hospital blanket. Where do you begin when the beginning doesn't make sense? 3 nights earlier. The blizzard had come without warning, the kind of storm that erased the world into white chaos. Nora Sinclair sat behind the steering wheel of her 2008 Honda Civic, hands shaking not from cold but from the foreclosure notice crumpled in her glove compartment. $125,000. Douglas Hale, her landlord, wanted it in 3 days or she and Emma would be on the street. 3 days. She had worked double shifts at Sunrise Care Home for 8 months straight, coming home with exhaustion carved into her bones and tips that barely covered gas. 8 months of changing bedpans and listening to wealthy people complain about the weather while she counted the dollar bills in her pocket like they were sacred objects. $78. That was all she had left. The highway dissolved into white. Her car sputtered once, twice, then stopped completely, the engine dying somewhere outside the city limits where streetlights couldn't reach. She sat in the darkness and silence, listening to the wind howl like something alive and angry. Emma whimpered in the back seat, her small voice cutting through the cold. "Mommy, I'm scared." "I know, baby. I know." Nora had no phone signal. No blanket that mattered. She had a threadbare coat that had stopped keeping out the cold 3 winters ago, and a daughter who was 6 years old and didn't understand that her mother had no idea what came next. The snow fell harder. The world outside the windshield became nothing but white static, as if existence itself had been erased. That's when the lights appeared. Headlights cutting through the blizzard like searchlights through darkness. Not one set of lights but multiple. Nora watched as a convoy of black SUVs materialized through the snow, their engines sounding like distant thunder. The vehicles pulled in front of her, behind her, beside her, boxing her in. Her breath caught in her throat. In Las Vegas, when a convoy of black SUVs pulled up, it meant one of 2 things. You had done something very wrong, or something very dangerous had just arrived. A man emerged from the lead vehicle. He was tall. Not just tall but built like someone carved him from stone and forgot to add softness. His suit was black, tailored so perfectly it looked like armor. His hair was dark, swept back from a face that had never smiled, dominated by eyes the color of winter itself. A thin scar ran from his left eye down to his cheekbone, white against olive skin. He wore a gold watch on his left wrist that probably cost more than Nora's car and everything in it combined. He moved toward her window with the deliberate pace of someone used to being obeyed before he gave an order. Marco. The name would come to her later. For now, he was just one of many men in dark coats, and his hand was moving toward the window, and Nora's heart was exploding inside her chest like it might break through her ribs. She rolled down the window. Ice crystals blew into the car. "Please," she said. Her voice came out fractured, barely a whisper. "My car broke down. My daughter, she's in the back seat. She's cold. I have $78. I can give you that. I just need to get to a town, somewhere warm, somewhere I can call for help." Marco stared at her without speaking. His eyes scanned past her, past the broken car, past everything she was, and she felt the weight of her insignificance settle on her shoulders like a physical thing. Invisible. She was invisible. His hand moved to his ear. He spoke into an earpiece, his voice low and controlled. Words she couldn't hear. Words that were about her, she was certain of it. Behind him, warm light spilled from the lead SUV. She could see a figure sitting in the back, head bent, reading something on a phone. The figure looked up. A man stepped out of that SUV. He wore a charcoal suit, and underneath it, an open white shirt revealing the muscular planes of his chest. His hair was dark, swept back from a face that could have been beautiful if it wasn't so utterly devoid of mercy. His eyes found Nora's across 30 feet of snow and blizzard, and something in those eyes shifted. Something cold and dangerous and utterly impossible to read. He was older than Marco, maybe 45, maybe 50. His face carried the weight of 1,000 decisions made in darkness. A ring glinted on his right hand. Gold. Heavy. The kind of ring that marked someone as important in a world most people pretended didn't exist. He walked toward her car with Marco at his side, his shoes crunching against the fresh snow, every step radiating absolute authority. "Open the door," Marco said. It wasn't a request. Nora's hand moved on its own, pulling the door handle. The wind rushed in, howling, and she shivered so violently her teeth chattered. The man looked down at her. Down, because she was sitting and he was standing, and even then the difference in their power felt like the distance between heaven and hell. "There is a child," Marco said quietly. The man's jaw tightened. His eyes moved to the back seat where Emma sat huddled against the door, her 6-year-old body curled around a stuffed rabbit, her eyes wide and terrified. He looked at Emma for 5 full seconds. Then he looked back at Nora. "What is your name?" His voice was deep and solid like an oath, like something that once spoken could never be unspoken. "Nora," she whispered. "Nora Sinclair." "And the child?" "Emma. She's 6. He turned to Marco without another word. "Get them out of the cold. Now." Marco opened the back door. Emma made a small sound of fear. Nora twisted in her seat, reaching for her daughter, but Luca Calabrese was already leaning in, his massive frame blocking out the wind. His hands were gentle as he lifted Emma into his arms. The little girl clung to her stuffed rabbit and to the lapel of his suit jacket, her small fingers gripping the fabric like it was the only solid thing in a world made of chaos. "It's all right," he said. His voice had changed. It had softened. "You are safe now." That lie would stay with Nora for the rest of her life, because in that moment, in the arms of a stranger who was definitely dangerous and definitely powerful and definitely not safe in any conventional sense, Emma had stopped trembling. She had buried her face in his chest and stopped being afraid. Nora climbed out of the car on legs that didn't feel like her own. A second man appeared from the convoy, this one younger than Marco but with the same cold eyes. "Gino." He took Nora's arm and guided her toward one of the black SUVs, and she didn't resist because her daughter was already being carried toward warmth and shelter, and she would follow her child anywhere. The SUV smelled like leather and expensive cologne. Heaters poured warm air from vents. Luca sat in the back with Emma cradled against him, and the child had closed her eyes as if trusting herself to sleep for the first time in days. Nora sat across from them, and Marco sat beside her, and the convoy began to move back toward the city, back toward lights and civilization, back toward a place she had never been and couldn't imagine existed. "What is your situation?" Luca asked. His eyes remained on Emma, who slept, her small body relaxed against his chest in a way that made Nora's heart ache with confusion. "I don't understand," Nora said. "Why were you on that highway in a storm with no supplies and a child?" "The foreclosure notice. The $125,000. The fact that Douglas Hale, her landlord, had given her 3 days to pay or he would evict her. The fact that she had nowhere else to go, no one else to call, nothing and no one in the world except the sleeping 6-year-old she had somehow managed to keep alive through poverty and desperation and fear. "My landlord," Nora said. Her voice broke on the words. "He's taking everything. I have 3 days." Luca's hand was stroking Emma's hair with infinite gentleness. But something in his expression had hardened. Something cold and dangerous had stirred behind his eyes. "Tell me his name." "Douglas Hale." The convoy pulled up to a set of ornate iron gates. Security cameras mounted on both sides. The gates opened without hesitation. A long circular driveway. And then, rising up before them like something from a dream, a mansion. Not a house. A mansion. Marble steps leading up to ornate double doors carved from dark wood. Columns holding up a portico that had cost more than Nora would earn in a lifetime. Chandeliers visible through tall windows, catching light like captured stars. This was not safety. This was something else entirely. This was stepping into a world where power itself lived and breathed and made decisions about the fate of ordinary people like her. Luca Calabrese carried Emma up the marble steps toward those double doors. Marco and Gino flanked him. Nora followed, still wrapped in her threadbare coat, still shaking, still unable to believe this was real. The doors opened before he could reach them. And in that moment, as she crossed the threshold into a mansion that smelled like old money and older secrets, Nora Sinclair did not know that 3 days would change her entire understanding of power and protection and what it meant to be invisible in a world that had learned to notice her. She did not know that the man carrying her sleeping daughter through marble halls had already decided her fate, and the decision he had made would destroy 2 people who had marked her as their target. She did not know any of it. She only knew that for the first time in 8 years, she was warm. And her daughter was warm. And someone powerful had chosen to intervene in a way that suggested he understood something about her struggle that no one else had ever understood. Behind her, through those carved doors, the blizzard continued to howl. The snow fell. The wind raged. And in a penthouse office overlooking the Las Vegas skyline, a man named Douglas Hale received a phone call that would change everything. 72 hours before the mansion doors opened, Nora Sinclair stood in the break room of Sunrise Care Home, staring at $43 spread across her trembling palm. The fluorescent lights above hummed their mechanical song, casting everything in a sickly white glow that made her skin look paper-thin, translucent, like she was already fading away. The break room smelled of institutional food and disinfectant, that particular blend that meant sickness and decay trying to hide beneath chemicals. She had just finished her double shift. 11:47 at night, and her feet ached with a pain that had long ago stopped being sharp and had become something duller, more permanent, like a part of her body's natural state now. $43. This was what her generosity had earned her today. One patient, Mr. Reeves in foot 12, had slipped a $5 bill into her pocket after she'd helped him bathe. And Mrs. Kowalski had given her 3 singles because Nora had braided her hair the way her daughter used to. The rest came from clearing meal trays, from helping people who could barely move, from wiping away things no one should have to wipe away. The tips trickled in like mercy from people who had almost nothing themselves, and she took them because she had less. She counted and recounted, unable to stop her fingers from moving through the bills. 43. No. $43.78 if she counted the coins. She closed her eyes. That was not quite enough for groceries tomorrow. That was barely enough for Emma's asthma medication, which cost $42.00 every single month, without fail, a bill as predictable as her own heartbeat. A hand touched her shoulder. She jumped, her eyes snapping open, her body doing that thing it still did after 8 years, the flinching, the protective tensing, the memory of violence stored in muscle and bone. Mrs. Chen stood there, 74 years old, thin as prayer, her white hair braided in a long rope down her back. She worked in housekeeping, and she had seen things in this place that broke the human heart into smaller and smaller pieces. She saw Nora, though. Not the way the other staff did. She saw her. "You work too hard, dear," Mrs. Chen said, her accent soft, Mandarin underneath the English like an echo of somewhere else. "When do you rest?" Nora forced a smile. The kind of smile that used muscles she barely exercised anymore. "Rest is for people who can afford it, Mrs. Chen." Mrs. Chen's weathered hand squeezed her shoulder. She did not say anything else. She simply held that touch there for 2 seconds longer than was necessary, and in that touch was an entire conversation about how the world breaks people, and how some people bear the breaking better than others, and how it was not fair, none of it was fair. When Mrs. Chen left, Nora sat alone in the break room. The vending machine in the corner hummed. Somewhere down the hallway, a patient was crying out for a nurse who could not come fast enough. She stuffed the $43 back into her uniform pocket and stood up. The parking lot was brutal. November in Las Vegas, and the temperature had dropped to 38 degrees, the kind of cold that made her threadbare coat feel like tissue paper. Her 2004 Honda Civic sat under a flickering light, the battery indicator having been slowly dimming for the past 6 months, promising failure any day now. The interior smelled like worn upholstery and the fast food containers she could not quite bring herself to throw away. Emma's car seat sat in the back, empty for now, waiting. She opened the glove compartment. Her hand found the foreclosure notice immediately, as if the document had been calling to her, whispering. She pulled it out slowly, unfolded it slowly, read it slowly, even though she had already memorized every word. $125,000. 3 days. Or she and Emma would be on the street. The number swam in front of her. 125,000. She made 32,000 a year gross, before taxes, before expenses, before the medications and the rent and the electricity and the food and Emma's asthma inhaler and the car insurance. She would need to work without sleeping, without eating, without stopping, for nearly 4 years just to repay this one man, this landlord with a face like a knife and eyes that had looked at her in a way that made her skin crawl. Douglas Hale. She knew his type. She had married his type once, and it had taken her 8 years to scrape together enough money and courage to escape. Her phone rang. The number was unknown, but she knew who it was. She always knew. Miss Sinclair. His voice came through the speaker like oil, like something that wanted to coat her throat and slide down into her lungs. Douglas Hale. She gripped the steering wheel. The 3 days are not negotiable, he continued. His voice carried the particular laziness of someone who knew they had power and did not need to rush. 125,000. By Friday morning, or I will have to let the property move through the legal process. And you understand what happens to women like you in that situation, I imagine. She could not speak. Her throat had closed. I have friends in the city, you see. Very interested parties. Generous people who have certain appetites and who pay very well for opportunities. Young mothers especially. They do very well on the market. Your daughter, too, actually. She is how old now? 7. Emma was 5. But Nora did not correct him. I would hate to see such a pretty girl end up in circumstances where she could not be protected. You understand what I am saying? The silence that followed was louder than any scream. She hung up. Her hand shook so badly she almost dropped the phone. The foreclosure notice fell into her lap, and she stared at those numbers again. 125,000. 3 days. And a man in a suit somewhere in the city who was thinking about her daughter's body the way a merchant thinks about merchandise. The engine started reluctantly, coughing like an old man with consumption. The heater was broken, had been broken for 2 months, so she sat in the freezing cold while the car warmed up just enough to be technically functional. The radio came on as she pulled out of the parking lot. A news alert cut through the music. Blizzard warning, visibility near zero by midnight, roads closing systematically starting at 11 p.m. The highway stretched ahead of her, heading toward the neighborhood where Mrs. Rodriguez was watching Emma. Mrs. Rodriguez could only keep her until midnight. After midnight, Nora would have to pick her up or pay $50 more, money she did not have, money that did not exist except as a concept. The radio continued its warning. The wind was already picking up. A few snowflakes drifted down, sparse at first, then more still, until the road ahead began to blur. She drove faster. She always drove faster when she was afraid. The car began to shake. The heater, still broken, was no match for the dropping temperature. Her breath came out in visible clouds. The snow fell harder now, not gentle, but aggressive, the sky closing down like a door slamming shut. She turned the windshield wipers to full speed. Their rhythm became hypnotic. Squeak, squeak, squeak. And still the snow came down. $43 in her pocket. 78 cents added to that, if the coins in her cup holder counted. 84 hours until her world ended. Her hands cramped on the wheel. The road was emptying out. Other drivers were smarter, turning back, heading home early, abandoning the highways to the storm. But she could not turn back. Emma was waiting. The engine sputtered. Just a slight hesitation, nothing more, but Nora's stomach seized. The car had been doing this more and more lately, small failures building toward a larger catastrophe. She pressed on the gas, and the engine responded, limping forward. The snow was so thick now that the headlights barely cut through it. The world beyond the glass had become nothing but white, an endless void of white, and inside the car there was just her and the sound of the wipers and the dying engine and the radio still insisting that the blizzard was intensifying, roads closing now, do not drive unless essential. Essential. Getting to her daughter before midnight was essential. Picking her up from Mrs. Rodriguez's apartment was the only essential thing left in her entire life. The engine sputtered again. Longer this time. A real cough, a real struggle. She eased off the gas, but the problem was not her foot, the problem was the car itself, the problem was that everything she owned was breaking and she could not afford to fix it. The highway curved ahead, and the snow swallowed the curve completely. She slowed down. The engine sputtered and coughed and struggled. She could smell something hot, something burning. The dashboard temperature gauge began to creep higher. Please, she whispered to a god she was not sure listened anymore. Please, not tonight. Not tonight, not now, not when Emma is waiting. The engine gave a final, terrible sound. Not a sputtering sound, but a death rattle. A sound like surrender. The car coasted. No power. No steering assist. She guided it toward the shoulder of the highway, fighting the wheel, her small body no match for the vehicle's weight. The tires crunched on gravel. The snow fell. And the car came to rest, silent, dead, on the shoulder of a highway that had disappeared into a blizzard that had swallowed the entire world. Nora sat in the silence. The radio continued its meaningless warnings. She turned it off. In the quiet that followed, she could hear her own breathing, thin and panicked, and the sound of wind outside, howling like something alive, like something angry. Her phone had 1% battery remaining. She looked at the time, 11:58. 2 minutes until midnight. 2 minutes until Mrs. Rodriguez stopped waiting. 2 minutes until Nora failed at the one job that mattered. She tried the ignition. Nothing. Again. Nothing. The car was gone. As dead as her prospects, as dead as her hope. Through the snow-covered windshield, she saw nothing. Just white. Just wind. Just the absolute darkness of a winter night that had turned hostile. Somewhere down that highway, in the distance, headlights appeared. Faint at first, then brighter. A car was coming. She could not see what kind of car. Just lights cutting through the snow, multiple lights, moving fast, and the sound of engines, heavy engines, vehicles that cost more than her entire life savings. The headlights grew closer. And out of the blizzard emerged what looked like something from another world. Black SUVs, 3 of them, moving in formation like a convoy, like a military operation, like something dangerous and organized and utterly disconnected from the broken woman sitting in a 2004 Honda Civic on the shoulder of a highway. Nora's hand moved toward the door lock. Her instinct said lock the doors, hide, disappear. But she had already locked the doors. And there was nowhere to hide. The convoy slowed as it approached her car. The lead SUV stopped 10 feet away, and the world went very, very quiet. The world went very, very quiet. The 3 black SUVs had slowed to a stop, their headlights cutting through the white chaos like blades through silk. Nora's hand trembled on the steering wheel. Her phone showed 1% battery. The clock on the dashboard read 11:58 p.m. 2 minutes until Mrs. Rodriguez stopped waiting. 2 minutes until she failed the only thing that mattered. She tried the ignition again. Nothing. The engine was dead. The car was dead. Everything was dead. Through the snow-covered windshield, she saw the doors of the lead SUV open. Figures emerged, tall and deliberate, moving through the blizzard with the precision of men trained for violence. Black tactical gear. Earpieces. Weapons holstered beneath their jackets. These were not police. These were something else entirely. Nora's instinct screamed to lock the doors, but they were already locked. Her other instinct screamed to run, but there was nowhere to run in a blizzard that had swallowed the world. She looked back at Emma. Her daughter sat curled in the back seat, wrapped in Nora's only jacket, breathing the shallow breaths of a child in hypothermic shock. Emma's lips were turning blue. Her small chest rose and fell, each breath a question that Nora could not answer. Nora made a choice. She unbuckled her seatbelt, climbed out of the car into wind that cut like a blade wrapped in ice, and opened the back door. Emma stirred but did not wake. Nora lifted her, wrapping her in the jacket and her own body heat, and began walking into the blizzard. The shoulder of the highway was invisible. Everything was invisible. She could see 3 feet in front of her face, then nothing. Wind tore at her thin sweater. Snow stung her face like 1,000 tiny fingers trying to claw her down. Her legs felt like they belonged to someone else, heavy, distant, numb. She walked. 1 foot in front of the other. 1 breath after another. Emma's weight in her arms was the only thing that felt real. Her legs started to fail. She stumbled. Caught herself. Stumbled again. This time she fell hard against the guardrail, her knee screaming, the cold driving the pain away almost immediately. She got up. Took 2 more steps. Fell again. This time she stayed down. She collapsed against the guardrail, holding Emma against her chest, her back pressed into the metal like it could protect her from the cold that was slowly, surely stealing her warmth. Her breath came in clouds. Her fingers had stopped working. The cold didn't hurt anymore. It just was our presence, like a hand pressing down on her chest, like the lid of a coffin being sealed. Is this how it ends? She thought of the foreclosure notice, still crumpled in her car's glove compartment. She thought of Mrs. Rodriguez at the hospital, waiting for someone who would never arrive. She thought of the call from Douglas Hale 2 nights ago, his voice slick as oil. You and your daughter would fetch a good price. My buyers pay very well. She thought of Emma's small hand in hers, and she held tighter. Then she saw them. Headlights cutting through the blizzard, bright and impossibly clear. Not 1 vehicle. 3. Moving in formation through weather that should have stopped any reasonable person from driving. The black SUVs approached at a steady speed, their windows tinted so dark that Nora could see nothing inside them. They slowed. They stopped. Doors opened with a soft mechanical whisper. Men emerged, 4 of them, wearing black tactical gear that made them look like ghosts made solid. They moved with the discipline of soldiers, spreading out, their eyes scanning the white chaos with the focus of hunters. One of them saw her. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and the face of someone carved from granite. His name was Marco, though Nora didn't know that yet. He approached slowly, carefully, like someone approaching a wounded animal that might bolt. Are you injured? His voice was deep and steady, a voice trained to sound calm even in violence. Nora couldn't speak. Her jaw had locked from the cold. She just held Emma tighter, as if holding her meant she could keep her alive through sheer force of will. Marco crouched beside her, and she flinched. It's okay. We're going to help you. He nodded to the second man, who was moving toward them with urgency. This was Gino, younger, with kind eyes that didn't match the gun at his hip. Your daughter needs medical attention. Now. Gino reached for Emma gently, and something in his touch, the absolute gentleness of it, made Nora understand that he was used to handling broken things. She released her grip. She had no choice. Her arms had stopped responding to her brain. Marco lifted Nora like she weighed nothing, his arms steady beneath her, and carried her toward the center SUV. The other men formed a perimeter, their eyes still scanning the blizzard, still hunting for threats that didn't exist here. The SUV door opened. Warmth rushed out like a living thing, and Nora gasped. Her body was so cold that the warmth felt like pain. She was placed gently across a leather seat that probably cost more than her car, and for a moment all she could do was sit in that impossible warmth and remember what it felt like to have circulation in her fingers. And that's when she saw him. He sat across from her, on the opposite side of the SUV, illuminated by the soft glow of overhead lights. He was tall, even sitting, with shoulders so broad that he seemed to take up half the vehicle's interior. His suit was charcoal gray, tailored so precisely that it must have cost thousands of dollars. His shirt was white, open at the collar, revealing a chest of dark hair and a gold chain that caught the light. His face was all sharp angles and harder shadows, a face that had learned to show nothing because showing something was a weakness that enemies exploited. But it was his eyes that held her. They were dark, almost black, and filled with something ancient and painful. He stared at Nora with an intensity that made her feel like he could see through her skin, through muscle and bone, straight into the place where her fear lived. His eyes moved to Emma, unconscious now from shock and cold and exhaustion, and something in those eyes shifted. Just barely. Just enough for Nora to see it. He picked up a phone, held it to his ear, and his voice came out low and controlled, like thunder heard from a great distance. Dr. Santos is still in residence. Pause. Have him waiting in the guest wing. The child is showing signs of hypothermia. Possibly severe asthma. I want medication on hand. Pause. Yes. Now. He ended the call. His eyes returned to Nora. Drive, he said to Marco, who was already moving into the front seat. The mansion. Do not exceed the speed limit. Every movement smooth. Marco nodded once and pulled the SUV onto the highway. Behind them, the other two vehicles fell into formation, and the convoy moved through the blizzard like something that did not fear storms because it had become a storm itself. Nora tried to speak. Her voice came out as a whisper, fractured and trembling like a candle in the wind. Who are you? The man across from her leaned forward slightly. His cologne smelled like expensive wood and danger. Someone your daughter doesn't need to be afraid of, he said. That is all you need to know right now. He removed his suit jacket and draped it over Emma, tucking it around her with surprising gentleness. Then he settled back into his seat and closed his eyes, as if the conversation was over. It was. Nora held Emma and watched the blizzard blur past the window and tried to understand what had just happened. She had one thought that kept repeating itself like a prayer: whoever this man was, he had resources that suggested he could solve problems that destroyed ordinary people. She didn't know his name. She didn't know his world. She didn't know that in that moment, Marco was calling Gino on a secure line, and Gino was saying what both men were thinking. In 15 years, I've never seen the boss bring a civilian to the mansion. Never. Something's different tonight, Marco replied. Yeah, Gino said. Something is. The convoy drove through the night, carrying a dying woman and her child toward a world they didn't understand, into the house of a man who would become their savior or their destruction, and no one yet knew which. 1 week had passed since the blizzard delivered Nora Sinclair to the mansion. 7 days of warm meals, of Emma sleeping through the night without nightmares, of Nora discovering that safety felt like a foreign country she was still learning to navigate. The mansion's marble hallways no longer echoed with her footsteps the way they had on that first morning. Now they felt almost familiar. Almost like home. But peace, Nora was learning, was a luxury that could be revoked without warning. The gate buzzer sounded at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. A white Mercedes pulled through the iron entrance, pristine as a swan gliding across dark water. Victoria Ashford emerged wearing a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than Nora's entire life had cost. Her blonde hair was styled in waves that took hours to achieve. Her smile was a knife wrapped in lipstick. Luca was in his office when Marco delivered the news. The boss sat behind his desk, the leather chair creaking under his weight as he leaned back. Marco's voice was tight. Ms. Ashford is here. Says she needs to speak with you. Says it's about Nora Sinclair. Something cold moved through Luca's chest. He straightened. Show her in. Victoria entered like she owned the room. She glided across the hardwood floor, the sound of her heels clicking in measured rhythm, each step a declaration. She wore diamonds at her throat and wrists. Everything about her screamed old money and ruthlessness disguised as grace. Mr. Calabrese, she said, sitting without being asked. How gracious of you to receive me. I know your time is valuable. Luca said nothing. His silence was a wall. Victoria pulled a folder from her Hermes bag. She slid it across the desk with the precision of someone playing chess. I believe you're harboring my property. A woman named Nora Sinclair and her daughter. Emma, I think the child's name is. Charming little thing. The way she said property made something in Luca's jaw clench. His hands remained flat on the desk. They owe my associate Douglas Hale $125,000, Victoria continued, her voice smooth as honey poured over broken glass. That debt is documented, perfectly legal. I have paperwork here showing the original contract signed 8 years ago when Douglas was kind enough to help Nora with her medical bills. She promised to repay him. She reneged. Now the interest has accumulated. The debt, Luca said, his voice like thunder rolling across distant mountains, was purchased through human trafficking. The woman was coerced. Victoria's smile didn't waver. That's a matter of interpretation, Mr. Calabrese. I'm prepared to be reasonable. Return them to us, and we'll forget this unfortunate misunderstanding. They continue to owe the debt, but at least they'll have a path forward. With you, they have nothing. You'll eventually tire of playing savior. Where will they be then? Luca leaned back in his chair. And if I refuse? Then I'll make calls, Victoria said. Her voice dropped, became something intimate and poisonous. The kind of calls that bring federal attention to your operations. I have friends in very high places, Mr. Calabrese. Friends who would love to know about your cash holdings. Your offshore accounts. Get out. His voice could have frozen blood in veins. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Victoria stood slowly. She was the only woman alive who could stand up in front of Luca Calabrese without trembling. 48 hours, Mr. Calabrese. Then I bring the law down on this mansion like the wrath of God. She turned and walked toward the door. Her heels clicked against the marble. Click! 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 The sound of a countdown. When the door closed behind her, Luca picked up his phone. He dialed Marco. Bring me everything. Account numbers, locations, client lists. Everything they have on trafficking. I want it within 6 hours. What do you need it for? Marco asked. Justice, Luca said. The kind that sticks. He ended the call and sat in the darkness of his office. Outside the windows, Las Vegas sprawled beneath him, millions of lights in the darkness. Somewhere in this city, two people who had destroyed lives were planning their next move. They believed themselves untouchable. They believed they had power. They were about to discover how wrong they were. That night, at 2 in the morning, Nora couldn't sleep. Emma was upstairs in the guest room that had become her bedroom, surrounded by soft blankets and stuffed animals Luca had somehow found time to buy. The child had stopped having nightmares 3 days ago. That milestone alone felt impossible, like a small miracle Nora still couldn't quite believe was real. Nora went to the kitchen. The house was quiet except for the distant sound of security personnel, the soft whisper of the heating system. She poured a glass of water and stood at the window overlooking the garden behind the mansion. City lights glowed on the horizon. The November air beyond the glass looked sharp enough to cut. She was thinking about leaving. Taking Emma and disappearing into the darkness before she brought destruction on the man who had saved them. Before Victoria Ashford made good on her threats. Before Luca Calabrese paid some terrible price for sheltering 2 women he should never have noticed. The garden called to her like a siren song. A place to think. A place to make a decision. She went outside, pulling a thin sweater around her shoulders. The cold bit through immediately, freezing the exposed skin of her neck and wrists. The garden was beautiful even in winter. Manicured hedges. Stone pathways. A fountain that stood silent and dark. She heard the footsteps too late. A hand clamped over her mouth. Rough. Smelling like cigarettes and diesel fuel. An arm wrapped around her waist like a vice, lifting her off the ground. She tried to scream, but the hand pressed harder, suffocating sound before it could form. Douglas Hale. She recognized his voice immediately, that rasp like gravel being dragged across concrete. Did you really think you could hide from me? You're mine, Nora. Bought and paid for. And that little girl sleeping upstairs? She'll fetch 3 times what you will. Maybe 4 if I market her right. Every scar on Nora's back began to burn. Her vision tunneled. She was 8 years old again, watching her mother get hit. She was 19, pinned beneath her first husband's weight. She was trapped in that apartment where every breath tasted like fear. She was going to watch Emma disappear. She was going to fail her daughter. Then something broke inside her? Not her spirit. Her paralysis. Nora drove her elbow backward with every ounce of remaining strength. It connected with Hale's throat. He gagged, his grip loosening for one precious half-second. She tore free and ran. Emma! Luca, she screamed, her voice shattered like broken glass. Hale caught her ankle. She fell hard, her palms scraping against frozen grass. Her vision sparked with pain. His fingers closed around her leg, dragging her backward toward a white van parked beyond the garden gate. She clawed at the ground, at stone, at air. Then the world became black suits and weapons. 12 men in black moved like ghosts through the garden. Marco and Gino first, their guns already drawn, surrounding Hale in seconds. His grip on her ankle released like he'd been burned. Luca appeared from the darkness like death itself. His face was absolutely calm. His eyes burned with something primordial, something that predated civilization. He crouched beside Nora without looking at Hale. "You're safe," he said. His voice was gentle. "I have you." When he turned to look at Hale, his hands became fists. By dawn, the FBI was moving. Luca had been working with Agent Rivera for 6 months, feeding information on trafficking networks in exchange for immunity on certain operations. This was his leverage. This was the moment he cashed in. "Everything," Luca said through the phone. 40 years minimum. Federal prison. I want them buried where they can never touch another woman or child. Done, Rivera said. Within 6 hours, Marco had infiltrated Hale's office and copied hard drives showing transactions with buyers in 7 countries. Gino tapped Victoria's phone and recorded her calling associates to warn them about the Sinclair problem, her own voice condemning her to decades of imprisonment. The raids happened at dawn. 12 FBI agents breached Douglas Hale's luxury condo. He was in bed. He tried to run. Agent Rivera tackled him personally, and handcuffs clicked around his wrists like a death sentence being pronounced. "Douglas Hale, you're under arrest for human trafficking, racketeering, kidnapping, and conspiracy to murder." Hale collapsed into sobs, his body trembling like a cornered animal. "I can pay. I have money. I have information." "Too late," Rivera said. The perp walk was broadcast on every channel. News cameras captured his face twisted in desperation, his hair disheveled, his designer clothes wrinkled and stained. By evening, the headline had spread across the country: "Major human trafficking ring dismantled, 58-year-old Douglas Hale arrested." Federal sentencing, 40 years. At the same hour, federal agents entered Victoria Ashford's mansion during her charity brunch. Society women in designer gowns watched in stunned silence as she was read her rights. Agent Rivera played recordings of her own voice describing Nora and Emma as product and inventory. One woman fainted. Another began to cry. Victoria's face drained of all color as her world collapsed in real time. The cuffs clicked. Her foundation was under investigation. Her accounts were frozen. By sunset, every news outlet in Las Vegas had run the story: philanthropist Victoria Ashford arrested in connection with international trafficking network. Not death. Death would have been too quick, too easy, too merciful. Instead, they faced 40 years of imprisonment. Complete financial destruction. The systematic annihilation of every connection they had built. They were no longer untouchable. They were nobody. 3 months had passed since the blizzard, since the moment Nora Sinclair stood frozen at Luca Calabrese's door with $78 and a daughter asleep in a car outside. Now she stood in his mansion's guest bedroom, staring at her reflection in the mirror, and barely recognized the woman looking back. The scar tissue on her back had begun to fade from angry red to silver. Her face held color again. Her hands, no longer raw and cracked from double shifts at Sunrise Care Home, had softened into something almost delicate. But it was her eyes that had changed most. They held something they did not hold before. Hope. Caution. The careful beginnings of trust. Emma had started at Westridge Academy, a private school that Luca had simply enrolled her in without asking Nora's permission. When Nora protested, he had said only, "The tuition is paid. Your daughter deserves to be somewhere she's not counted by the hour." She hadn't argued again. Instead, she'd swallowed her pride and accepted. Now she was enrolled in online business courses herself, courses that Luca had insisted on funding. "Pay me back when you're a millionaire," he'd said, the faintest smile at the corner of his mouth. She was taking him seriously, working through operations management and financial analysis late into the evenings while Emma slept upstairs in a real bedroom with soft blankets and a nightlight shaped like a star. The mansion had transformed into something unexpected. It was home. Not his home that they were staying in. Home. Rosa, the cook who had worked for Luca for 23 years, had begun teaching Nora Italian recipes, standing beside her at the kitchen counter, guiding her hands through the motions of making pasta from scratch. Marco, his dark eyes usually cold as slate, had taken to teaching Emma chess at the kitchen table on Sunday afternoons, his voice surprisingly patient as he explained the value of sacrifice and strategy. Even Gino, the quietest of Luca's men, had started leaving books on the library table for her: business memoirs, fiction, poetry. Just leaving them. Never saying anything. Yet Nora and Luca maintained careful distance. She lived in the guest wing. He remained in the master suite. They shared meals, but Rosa always served them at opposite ends of the dining table. They talked late into the evenings on the mansion's north terrace, but only about books, about the weather changing, about Emma's progress in school. They never spoke about the obvious thing that hung between them like a held breath. The infection came on a Tuesday. The scars on her back, legacy of the night Douglas Hale had thrown her against concrete, had begun to throb with dull pain. Nora tried to reach the spot with antibiotic cream, twisting herself into impossible angles, fingers fumbling uselessly at the center of her spine where the worst of it burned. She was still struggling when Luca knocked on her door, his dinner tray in hand, a habit he had fallen into, bringing her meals when she worked late on coursework. The knock came 3 times. She froze. "Come in," she called, quickly pulling her shirt down. He entered, set the tray on her desk, and then stopped. He could see her face, see the pain written there like a second scar. "What is wrong?" His voice came out like thunder, immediate and heavy. "Nothing. Just," she turned away. "It's fine." But he was already moving closer. "Nora." The way he said her name, like it mattered, like she mattered, broke something in her. She'd spent 8 years learning not to ask for help, learning that vulnerability meant destruction. But this was Luca, and somewhere in the 3 months of meals and conversations and the quiet way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, she'd begun to trust him. "My back," she said quietly. "The scar tissue." It's infected. I can't reach it properly. Silence stretched like pulled taffy. Then, show me. She lifted her shirt slowly, terrified, exposing the topography of her pain. Scars ran in every direction, thin lines like cracks in porcelain, deeper gouges where she'd hit concrete at angles, the systematic map of 8 years of surviving. She heard his breath catch. Felt the room temperature drop as rage moved through him like a blade wrapped in ice. His hands, when they touched her back, were impossibly gentle. He applied the antibiotic cream with the care of someone handling something holy. His jaw was locked so tight she thought it might break. His eyes burned with a fury so deep and controlled it terrified her more than any shout could have. Neither of them spoke. The intimacy was overwhelming, unbearable, necessary. When he finished, he stepped back, and she pulled her shirt down with shaking hands. "Thank you," she whispered. "Who did this to you?" His voice was barely a whisper itself, but it carried the weight of a death sentence. "Douglas. The night before the blizzard." She couldn't finish. Luca left the room. She heard the door to his office close, heard him on the phone with Marco, his voice dropping to something that sounded like a promise of annihilation. But when he returned an hour later, he simply sat beside her on the edge of the bed and said, "You are safe. Everything that touches you will be gentle now. I swear it." Emma called him Uncle Luca on a Thursday during dinner. They were eating Rosa's lasagna, steam rising from the ceramic dish in the center of the table. Emma had started talking more in recent weeks, the shell-shocked silence that had defined her at the beginning to crack into something closer to a child. She was 7 years old but had lived a lifetime of caution, of reading rooms and adults and the thin difference between safety and danger. She set down her fork and looked directly at Luca. "Can I call you Uncle Luca?" The room stopped. Marco and Gino, sitting at the far end of the table, went utterly still. Nora held her breath. Luca's fork was halfway to his mouth. It stopped there, suspended in time. His eyes met Emma's, and something in his chest seemed to shift visibly, a tectonic plate moving beneath carefully constructed stone. "You can call me that," he said, and his voice came out rough, unfinished. "If you want." Emma beamed, innocent and devastating in the way only children could be. "Okay, Uncle Luca." He set down his fork with elaborate care, excused himself politely, and walked out to the terrace. Nora waited exactly 90 seconds, then followed him. She found him gripping the railing, his shoulders shaking, his face turned away from the house. He was crying. She had never seen him cry. In 3 months of knowing him, 3 months of living in his space and eating his food and sharing his tentative intimacy, she had never seen anything break through that careful control. She touched his back, the same way he had touched hers. "You're allowed to have a family again." His voice came out fractured. "I don't deserve." "Neither did I. But here we are." That night, she made a decision. Nora had started a consulting business out of a small office in downtown Las Vegas, using her 8 years of experience at Sunrise Care Home to help other facilities optimize their operations. It was small, the kind of thing no one would notice, but it was hers. Her first client, a regional care home chain, had paid her $5,000 for a 3-month operations assessment. She had framed the check before depositing it. Luca found the frame on her desk when he came to discuss her course materials one evening. He picked it up slowly, reading her name, Nora Sinclair Consulting. The amount, $5,000. Her signature below it, careful and deliberate. "I'm not invisible anymore," she said, and heard the truth in it, the solid weight of it. "You never were." He set the frame down with reverence. "I saw you the moment you stood at my door. I see you every single day." The weeks accumulated. Summer turned toward autumn. Emma's confidence bloomed like something planted in good soil, finally receiving sunlight. She made friends at school. She laughed without waiting to see if it was safe first. She was becoming, simply, a child. Nora was offered a major contract, a hospital chain with 12 locations, looking to restructure their entire care operations. It was the kind of opportunity that could transform her small business into something substantial, something that couldn't be taken away. She spent 2 weeks preparing her presentation, late nights at the library table while Luca worked through correspondence in the chair across from hers. One evening, she asked him, "Would you listen to my presentation? Tell me if it's any good." He looked up from his papers, and she saw something in his expression shift. Something proprietary and proud and impossibly tender. "Of course." She walked through the entire pitch while he listened without interrupting, his dark eyes never leaving her face. When she finished, he said simply, "You'll get the contract." "You don't know that." I know you." He stood, crossed to her, and took her hands in his. "That presentation is flawless because you understand what you're talking about. Because you know what it's like to be unseen by systems that are supposed to care for you. That knowledge is your greatest strength." Marco and Gino, passing through the library, exchanged a look. Marco muttered something low enough that only Gino could hear. He's completely in love with her. Gino nodded, a small smile playing at his mouth. "Has been since the blizzard. He's just been waiting for her to stand on her own first. A man like Luca, he couldn't ask her to stay until she had the choice to leave." The presentation was on a Tuesday. Nora wore a navy suit, professional, confident, chosen carefully. Luca's hand rested on the small of her back as she walked into the hospital's executive office. He didn't come inside. But he waited in the lobby for 4 hours, barely moving, like a promise she could count on. When she emerged, she was already crying. "They hired me. 3-year contract. 6 figures." He pulled her into his chest, and she felt his heart beating fast, faster than she would have expected from a man like Luca Calabrese. "I know they did. I told you that you would." 6 months after the blizzard, everything had changed. Nora's business occupied a small but elegant office space that she'd leased herself, paying market rate with her own money, insisting on independence even though Luca had offered to help. She employed 3 people now. Douglas Hale and Victoria Ashford sat in a federal supermax prison, their trafficking network completely dismantled, 73 women and 12 children given new lives in its aftermath. Nora had testified at their trial via video, her face calm, her voice steady. She no longer ran from her past. She carried it with her, transformed into something that meant something: evidence, testimony, power. The scars on her back had faded to silver lines. She no longer flinched when people touched her. Emma was thriving. She was 12 now, or would be in 3 weeks. Smart and confident and safe in a way that felt miraculous to Nora, who had spent so many nights terrified that her daughter would carry the weight of their years forever. On an evening in late spring, with the desert air still warm at sunset, Nora told Luca, "I'm moving out next month." His expression didn't change, but his hands tightened on the glass he was holding. "I see. I found an apartment. 2 bedrooms, good neighborhood, near Emma's school. Safe building. I can afford it now." She stood beside him in the garden, the same garden where Douglas Hale had thrown her against concrete. But they had reclaimed this space, walked it together until the trauma transformed into something she could bear. "I need you to understand, I'm not running. I'm not afraid anymore. I'm moving out because I need to prove I can stand on my own. That I'm not here because I'm desperate or grateful or... I know." His voice was quiet. "I've been waiting 6 months to hear you say you're staying because you want to. Not because you need to." She turned to face him fully, and in the dying light, he was all sharp angles and careful intensity. "I want to. I want you. I want a life that I built with my own hands that I choose to share with you." His hand came up to her face, gentle despite the calluses, despite years of holding weapons and power. "Say it again. Say you want me." "I want you, Luca Calabrese. I've wanted you since the night you took us in. I've wanted you every single day I've been learning to be whole again." The kiss was inevitable, months in the making, tender and fierce at once. When they broke apart, his forehead rested against hers. I'm still not a good man. Good enough for me. A year later, Nora stood at a charity gala, at a podium, speaking about survival and visibility and the power of someone choosing to see you when everyone else looks away. She wore an elegant dress in deep emerald, and her voice was steady and strong. The crowd applauded. Luca watched from the side, pride burning in his eyes. As they walked to the car afterward, snow began to fall. The first snow of the season. Nora tilted her face up, caught a snowflake on her tongue, and laughed. No longer afraid of winter. No longer invisible. Ready to go home? Luca asked, pulling her close. Always. If this story moved you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe because tomorrow we have another story that will stay with you long after you finish watching. Drop a comment telling us what you thought about Nora and Luca's journey. Remember this, you are never as invisible as you think you are. Someone sees you. Someone always sees you. And sometimes miracles come from the most unexpected places. After the rain, the sky clears. We will see you in the next video. Thank you for staying with us until the very end.